And to kick us off, I'm going to pass over, well, my name is Laura Pereira, sorry, and I'm going to be facilitating the discussion. So we have sort of 3 sections, variety of sort of really quick interventions, and then we're going to pass over for a more open discussion and hopeful engagement with the audience. So to kick us off, I'm going to hand over to my co-PI, Sally Archibald.
Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you for the opportunity to spend a whole hour here today telling you about our Future Ecosystems for Africa program. I think it's good to talk a little bit about where this started. So about 4 years ago, Oppenheimer Generations Research and Conservation, and led by Jonathan and Carrie, kind of approached us with the idea that we really need to drive some larger integrated research programs. And the one key point that we all agreed on was that there's something not in balance right now in terms of the actions that we're doing to try to create sustainable development in Africa. If we just carry on what we're doing, if you carry on what you're doing, we're going to end up in a future that we don't want. And this was highlighted to us by Jonathan. So the idea is we really need to shift the curve, shift the dial, change our actions in order to produce a future that we all desire. We want to go from the projected future, which, as the talks have told us today, some of it looks pretty dire, into a more preferable future where we as human beings living with nature, it's actually it's a future that we all would like to aspire to. But the challenge is that, we could imagine any preferable futures. We also need to think what could be possible. How could we achieve that future? So this beautiful cone that Laura introduced me to at some point in our collaboration together epitomizes what the whole brief that we were given by OGRC, which is to shift the dial, to move Africa into a more preferable path that we all would desire. So that was the Future Ecosystems for Africa program. We are a global collaboration for local action. And we really want to develop strong African voices, informing just and sustainable pathways for Africa and for the world. We want to be an inspiration for the world in how we do things. So there's a lot of amazing work going on in Africa right now, trying to achieve the same thing we're trying to achieve. So we want to work with those efforts to improve biodiversity conservation and social well-being, but we want to make sure that they're informed by the best possible data and in a way that really does capture the priorities and values of African people. But we also, and this is kind of key, and I think everyone involved in this project recognizes that that's not enough. We really want to be driving transformative change across a range of spheres, because otherwise we're not going to shift the dial, we're not going to move towards a more preferable future. And then we definitely want to provide tools for decision-making and for action. How do we do this? This is a beautiful figure that sort of summarizes some of the ways that we work together on the continent. We build actionable capacity through futures thinking. We forge a lot of partnerships where we provide a detailed evidence base using all of our networks across the continent. And we support cutting-edge multidisciplinary science. And then that goes in 2 different directions. It goes on the ground towards implementation projects, working with people on the ground, and it goes up into the policy and funding sphere to try drive and change the way these policies work in Africa. And ultimately, we're aiming to empower African citizens. We forged a lot of partnerships in the last 4 years. As you can see, we don't totally have active people on the ground in every single country on the continent yet, but it's growing, and we do have some Africa-wide projects. So we really do represent a network of people, and it's just sad that there can only be this many on the stage with us today. There are many more here with us at the conference, and please make sure to reach out to them. I mentioned the implementation projects. We have a couple of really exciting activities on the ground, cutting across more futures thinking, community engagement, to the land management side of things. The most important stuff about this is that there's interaction between the projects. So we have colleagues in Angola looking at how fire in peatlands with agriculture, whether it can be sustainable and help feed people. We've got people in Zambia looking at fire regimes and biodiversity. We have people in Mozambique looking at how fire is used to get honey production. And these people talk to each other and share knowledge and share insights. But that's not really enough, as I mentioned. There's hundreds and millions of implementation projects on the ground in Africa. And talking to my past students yesterday, who many of them work for NGOs, many of them work for consulting companies, they were saying, we know what we need to do. We know what needs to be done on the ground. But what constrains us is that the funding coming in from outside is telling us to do something different. So we're really constrained. We know what needs to be done, and the funding and the policies are pushing us in a direction that we don't think is preferable. So as well as the implementation projects, we're also really working to change that policy and funding landscape. And this is just an example of one of the outputs involved in that. It's a paper we recently published, which has been really useful for engaging with some of our policy and government actors, just providing some principles about if you do want to fund something good on the ground in Africa, these are the 6 principles that you should think about if you want this project to achieve your goals, be aligned with the needs of people and nature, and to actually have long-term benefit. And we will hear some more about these actions in the next few minutes. Now, at this point, it's going to be hard in an hour to summarize this massive project. But fortunately, our wonderful colleague, Carlos Amato, who's doing some graphic harvesting in the corner there, helped us to produce this graphic. And the point of this graphic is to show that we're a group of people with very different skills, very different priorities, coming from very different disciplines. We have a bunch of people who are real hardcore scientists doing ecosystem functioning and biodiversity work on the ground, getting kind of on their hands and knees, getting pricked by things in the bushes. We have people who can think about economy and think about nature financing and link those ideas about people for nature and nature for people. And then we have people who are really good at working with communities, helping them to imagine the preferable futures that they want, and helping to make sure their voices are brought into these stages. And all of these people and all of these disciplines come together in a couple of activities, of which there are many people, and we're hoping that if you can zoom in and see the many people that are involved in this project. But what is really important is that the outputs, the thing we've managed to produce in the last 4 years, are informed by many different spheres. So the different activities come together to achieve something greater than the sum of its parts. And that's what this image is supposed to show. But at this point, I think Laura's going to help lead us through some of the stories of the things we've achieved in the last little while.
And so this comes to the interactive part of the panel. If you can see here, there's a QR code that you can scan, and we have a set of questions for you. Based on the discussions, what do you think we should stop doing? What do you think we should do more of? And what do you think we should just continue doing? As well as general questions. And we'll come back to that at the end of the panel in a more open, what we're going to call the interrogation session towards the end, which should really fire us up before moving on into the evening's activities. So this will come up periodically. I know if you're like me, you never actually land up getting the QR code the first time round. So don't worry, it will come up again. So this is just to introduce us. We didn't do it at the beginning. Sally is the co-PI on the project, on the program, together with myself, Laura Pereira, and our other colleague, Odi, who's on this side, sitting next to me, Odiruwe Selemane. And we'll sort of be coming up sporadically to sort of weave the story of this journey that you saw so beautifully captured by Carlos, and we'll come back to that at the end. And hopefully we've been able to tell the story. But for now, we wanted to sort of give a real impression of what we've actually been doing. What are the stories of on-the-ground data collection that the different collaborators that we've had on the project have been doing? So we've got 3 collaborators, Batlalifi Tatenda and Mohammed Amani, who are going to be coming up to just give a really brief insight into some of the work that they've been doing. And so it's my pleasure as our first speaker to introduce Batlalifi Khotwe, who is going to talk about futures thinking. Thanks, Batlalifi.
My name is Batlalifi Khotwe, and I'm a PhD candidate at Global Change Institute through the Future Ecosystems for Africa program. And I'm just going to share some snippets of my work that I've been doing in southern Kenya. So I want you to first think about what life would be like, what the reality would be like in this room if we were to have a Maasai pastoralist to come and give us advice or insights on how to coexist with wildlife and livestock systems within the various landscapes that they reside in. So for my project, I'm collaborating with the South Rift Organization of Landowners, which is a conglomeration of Maasai pastoralists who are based in southern Kenya, and they operate within numerous conservancies. But for the purposes of my study, I focused on two landscapes, the conservancies of Olkir Matian and Shompole. So smacked right bank there, excuse the resolution, between Amboseli and the Masai Mara in southern Kenya, just north of Lake Natron on the Tanzanian border, is where my work is based. So with the organization in the landscape, we're working in to say, what are these pastoral visions of future aspirations that live within the landscape? And how can we ethically, keyword, ethically, leverage some of these value matrix that exist within the landscape and into the broader livestock systems, more broadly for food systems transformations. So in 2022, IPBES released the values assessment, and with the values assessment being sourced by 13,000 sources and with member states of around 139 countries, all agreed that there needs to be some very important shifts that take place, part of which, within my 4 minutes, includes transitions or changes within the food system. So in order for us to achieve one of 4 pathways for for transformations, to build more sustainable and socio-ecological conservation spaces, we need to focus on 4 key areas. And because of time, I'm only going to focus on the part that's most relevant for my project, which is number 4, for earth stewardship and bicultural conservation. You cannot speak about Africa, as Prof. Belinda Reyes stated yesterday, and a colleague of ours, Anthony, stated that you cannot build Africa's futures without its people and landscapes involved. So then with onset of my project, I asked, what are some of these values or these cosmologies or knowledge systems that exist within the 2 landscapes, and how can we, in collaboration with the communities in the landscape, leverage them, as I've already said, ethically for broader food systems transformation? So what you're looking at is a camera trap that captured a lion a day before, and around 24 hours later captured livestock. It's these very important, interesting systems of coexistence that brought my work to the landscape. With that, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Batilifi. It's now my pleasure to call up Tatenda Gatore, who's going to talk us through his project.
Thank you. As introduced, my name is Tatenda. Before joining the FIFA, I was working for the Zimbabwe Forestry Commission as a researcher in forest and woodland management. And among all the duties that I did, some of the things that I did was to set up long-term forest inventory plots where we would measure tree growth, where we would assess tree growth with a special focus and interest on timber harvesting. And this made it possible for me to join FIFA from that perspective, where my role basically is to look at tree growth rates across Southern Africa from our woodlands and savannas. I make use of long-term tree data that have been collected by different researchers across Southern Africa under the CISO partnership and some bit of complicated models to be able to understand the tree growth rates across the region. My role basically is about bridging scales, where we need to try and move from individual localized case studies and try and come up regional insights that can be able to inform tree growth across the region. This kind of data that we have been generating under FIFA is very important in enabling us to have a balanced discussion within FIFA, considering the woodlands, how they are growing vis-a-vis other systems that are surrounding us. We understand that Africa is a very big landscape, and there are many systems with different people, with different interests for different people, and we need to integrate both. So I find so much value working in FIFA, where we are a multidisciplinary setup, where I have gained from combined ideas that help us to think appropriately about how we value our forests, but also valuing other systems like grasslands, and also incorporating expertise from different individuals. I have also benefited from this because it have enabled me to think appropriately about my assumptions when I'm looking at tree growth rates, when I'm looking at the different interests, when I'm looking at people, people who think in different ways, like futures for the people, people who look at socio-ecological systems or other interests from other different disciplines, which is very important for us to consider different views and multiple interests when we are looking at these systems. So this have helped me so much, and you've given me a platform even to share my products, to share my ideas. Through FIFA, I was able to come to the ORC for this year. Through FIFA, has given me platforms even to share my ideas through impact pathways that are coming through more collaboration with the different people. Also, the data that we are building is also enabled from the FIFA products that are coming up and others that have already come up to be able to make context-specific solutions and be able to profile ideas that enable various people and various interests to be met. While I look at my role within this system or within this project as a role that have enabled me to be able to ensure that the study of our woodlands and savannas, they are not done in isolation, but they are integrated along with other aspects of the environment or of the broader landscape, of the broader ecosystem. I've also been able to see and experience what others feel and how other views that come from other disciplines and specialities. Finally, while we can not fully understand what Africa's future ecosystems will be, it is my belief and my understanding that it is at the intersection of different systems and different specialities where new solutions can be birthed, which will enable us to manage our future ecosystems with respect. And I'm happy and delighted to be part of this collective, speaking from the woodlands and savannas perspectives and their growth, contributing to the broader picture of our systems in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tatenda. That was great. And last but not least, we have Mohammed Armani to come up. Armani, I know you. I am going to come and give you a hug at exactly 4 minutes if you haven't stopped talking. Thank you.
That's good. Thank you. Hello, everyone. As Laura said, my name is Mohammed Armani. I'm from Ghana, and I teach at a university in Kumasi called Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. And if you see the picture down there, that's what I'm really interested in, the forest savanna dynamics. I'm going to go really fast because I've been given only 4 minutes. But actually, unlike Tatenda, I have a very unbelievably weird background. So I started my career in forest certification and sustainability, spent most of my early years working in the forest reserves in Ghana, auditing timber companies and engaging with local communities, and trying to convince them about the usefulness of sustainability and certification. When you grow up in Ghana, you are told that there are a lot of dwarfs in the forest. I walked through all the forests in Ghana. I didn't find any. So I decided that, maybe it's time to go and do something else. So I went to Netherlands to study advanced forestry. And once I'm there, everything changes. I had a couple of classes where I read about fire ecology, tree-grass coexistence, and then I realized, I really love this stuff. you know, I told you I'm from Ghana, right? But actually, my dad is from Niger, so maybe it was already in my DNA from the beginning. I didn't know. So I got excited, and needless to say, I did my master's thesis looking at the vegetation dynamics of the forest savanna transition zone in Ghana. Finished, the next thing I know, I'm back in Ghana and back into forest certification again. You know, they're saying about old firewood catching fire very easily. This time not for long. Next you know, I'm already going back to China to do a PhD during the Ebola outbreak. So you can imagine what I had to experience. And then my PhD takes me into trade-based plant ecology. So if I say my background is weird now, you understand. So I moved from forestry to savanna ecology to trade-based plant ecology, looking at how spiny plants grow and defend themselves. So I come back to Ghana in 2020, during the outbreak of COVID. So imagine coming from China back to Ghana in the COVID period. And I was wondering, what am I going to do with all this disparate background? And that is when FIFA happened for me. My first assignment with FIFA was to draft a technical report on how to enhance climate actions on land in Ghana. It was a good opportunity, but also very challenging, because quite quickly we just realized that there's not enough evidence base to draw on. So I did what any researcher would do: build up a team, 2 Ghanaians, 1 Beninois, and 1 Ethiopian. And then we were all early career guys, so we struggled a little bit. But to cut long story short, we were able to put together the first Agnes evidence base and also completed a report. And during that time, I became acutely aware of the issues on climate actions in savanna landscape. I had, like I said, returned to Ghana, and I was already also reading the landscape in Ghana and seeing what was happening. So as if I had not had enough trouble already, I decided to start something new in Ghana through the support also of what I got from FIFA. So I established my research lab called the Plant Ecology and Nature Conservation Research Lab. Here I work mostly with really unbelievably smart undergrads and early career guys. We collect data, we synthesize information, and we are attempting to build collaboration with policymakers and managers towards bridging the science policy in Ghana's savanna. Recently, we have attempted to update the Agnes evidence base, and very soon we'll be done with that, and it will feed into the FIFA African Data Drive initiatives. I'm hoping that as FIFA 2 comes along, there will be more support for us to really get involved into trying to changing the narratives from the ground up. And last, this is my first ORC, but I just realized, oh, I'm an endangered and rare species because I'm the only West African that is here. If you're from West Africa, please sit down. Don't steal my shine.
Thank you so much. The threat of the hug always works. It's one that I keep in my back pocket. So now you've heard individual stories from researchers and how the work that they've been doing, as you can see, has not just been about the output that they have, but also the people they've been working with, the labs they've been able to establish, that sort of real policy interface that they've been able to pull together on the ground. We're now going to go to the next level and have 3 presentations, again, very, very short, just talking about some of the synthesis that has started to come together through the FIFA program, how we've been able to draw on these different data threads and to have 3 very, very different kinds of outputs. So again, it's my pleasure to ask Sally to come up on stage to talk about the landscape decision dashboard. Thanks, Sal.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Just to zoom in on Carlos's amazing slide again, there's been a bunch of outputs. We can't talk about all of them. We're going to zoom in on a few. But the landscape decision dashboard, I think, is something that's been quite important in that it's really one of these things that's integrating the data people like Tatenda, like Robert and Francis here, who are producing data on carbon and biodiversity and herbivore impacts, with the people who help us think around what is a preferable future and how do we help people design preferable futures. And it's also a collaboration with Rewild Capital, and I'll explain to you that in more detail just now. I think we've heard a lot in the last day or two about the challenges of people having different visions about what they want their land to look like. On the right here, we have the Mutinondo Wilderness Area in Zambia, where I was a tourist with my kids a few years ago. not an animal to be seen, but very beautiful. And then the same ecosystem, some people would like to have pastoral systems in there with cows. And my colleague Alicia from Tanzania is helping us to engage with the tricky issues between the foresters and the pastoralists in these ecosystems. And then there are other people who like, well, cows aren't like a natural herbivore. We need to replace them with wildebeest. And there's very contradictory views about the same ecosystem. So that's what's preferable. We disagree on what's preferable. We're also not always clear about what's possible. This photograph was taken by Stefan Woodbourne for me when he was at Gorongosa. Everyone there agreed they didn't want to have fire in the ecosystem, but were they able to keep fire out? No, because excluding fire from that system is not possible. So even you have to challenge our visions for the future with our process-based understanding of what actually can work in these ecosystems. Finally, there are people who like tall trees. When elephants knock down the tall trees, we accept it. When humans cut down the tall trees, that's called degradation, but you end up with very similar landscapes. We need to embrace all of this complexity. So how are we going to do that? We've got this landscape decision dashboard, and the audience is really anyone. It's designed to be working with landowners who want to know about the current state and the desirable state of their land. But we imagine that you could engage with tourists, with school kids, with anyone about what storytelling about where Africa is now, about how Africa looked in the past, and about how we could look in the future depending on what we value, and to create a tool for us to have these discussions. The scope is fully scalable. We are producing data and models at the scale of the whole continent, but you could also do it in your backyard if you wanted. And the idea is that Laura and her colleagues could, if they wanted to, put it in their backpack and go to the middle of nowhere to a small village in the Lua Plains in Zambia and use this tool to help have conversations with the people they work with. But we also own discussions with people at the Digital Dome about putting it up on the huge big screen that Wits has been developing and enabling school kids to have arguments about whether they want elephants in their village or not. I'm not going to go into details of our approach, just to say those 5 things are fairly novel in terms of these sorts of tools, and I can talk to you about them afterwards. But basically what we do is we quantify the current ecosystem state with great detail. We identify a preferred ecosystem state, and we identify one as ecologists, but we also allow the land users to put any state that they would prefer into that. So there's the option for different people to put in their different preferences at that stage. And then we evaluate the consequences of that intervention. And we cycle and we discuss it. At some point in that process, our fantastic Rewild Capital colleagues take all of those models and really use them to help the landowners find ways to fund and make their preferable state possible using the finance that is available. So it really is a very important collaboration for us. I'm not going to spend long just to say there's a lot of data. It's been amazingly rewarding to realize how much data we have. And we have an entire kind of product which is just highlighting for the world. There's a lot of great data in Africa if you know where it is, and here it is, and we're bringing it all in to be used in this decision tool. We've got a couple of really important case studies proving that this works. Together with Rewild Capital, we're running these tools in Golden Gate National Park, in Marakele, in Tswalu, really helping to work out, this is your reference state for grazer biomass. Your grazer biomass is 3 times what we think your reference state is. What are your options to change that? And what will the consequences be for the system? So at the moment, it's all in the data analysis stage. We have all the models. We haven't made the fancy dashboard yet. This is just a vision of how we want our dashboard to look. But the idea is that it's going to be really user-friendly. Someone could pull those little toggles and watch in real time what happens to their soil carbon for the site that they're interested in somewhere in Africa. And I'm going to hand back to Laura.
Thank you, Sal. So when the clicker becomes the talking stick, right, that you're only allowed to say something if you have it in your hand. It's now my pleasure to invite Kim Zola, who's going to talk to us about the Africa roadmap that has been keeping us up late for many nights. But please, Kim, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. As Laura mentioned, I'll be talking about the African roadmap. And fundamentally, what the roadmap is a framework for implementing natural climate solutions with a really fundamental question, which is how do we implement natural climate solutions in Africa that both serve development goals and also contribute to global climate policy? And this is represented as a document. So as Sally mentioned, this is one of the major outputs. This is represented as a technical document that enables decision makers to strategize ways to implement natural climate solutions that both mitigate climate change by increasing carbon sequestration, but also, and critically, promote non-carbon benefits. And when we talk about non-carbon benefits, we refer to things like biodiversity, livelihoods and well-being, food security, and water security. And this journey toward developing this really important roadmap has been quite a long one, as Lara mentioned. It's sort of started when we helped prep Africa's regional COP27 position, and with the help of Armani and Ibakun, who's our collaborator with IUCN. And we strategized in a way that enabled us to open doors to really make a difference in the climate policy space. And then about 2 years ago, at this very conference, OGRC introduced us to Conservation International, which enabled us to collaborate on this roadmap along with regional partners like the African Group of Negotiators. And this has been a really interesting journey getting us to the point of producing this document. Just a few lessons learned. Conservation International is a global NGO based in the US. We were really keen on bringing forward the idea that African solutions need to be context-specific. And instead of approaching natural climate solutions with this kind of global north perspective that planting trees is this panacea to mitigate against carbon as, as the major effort, we really pushed this narrative that people need to be front and center of this conversation. And this is especially important on this continent, where about 60% of people are reliant on ecosystem services for their well-being. And so this means that any climate solutions that we implement need to serve direct benefits to the communities who rely on these ecosystems. And we produced a document which we're really proud of. We worked really hard to push our narrative by mobilizing partnerships across the continent, getting African-specific data and contexts integrated into the roadmap. And we just had our soft launch at the African Climate Summit last month in Addis, which was amazing and really well received. And then just in terms of use and implementation, it's quite a busy graphic, but just to say that the most important sort of way to catalyze this roadmap is to identify that the regional, global, and local stakeholders need to be very well integrated, and these need to lead to actions that are informed by the values of local land users. And importantly, these need to be able to facilitate policy transformation, nature finance, and enable local users to use the environment in a way that doesn't hurt nature. And this enables us to protect, manage, and restore the landscape in a way that's sustainable in the long term. And we're really looking forward to the proper release of it. And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much, Kim. I'm now taking the unilateral decision to cut 1 minute off all of the subsequent presentations, so we do have time for talks. We're going to spice things up a little bit now. We're going to have a 30-second intervention by Mulako Kabisa, who's going to just explain a little bit of the background behind the video that we're going to be sharing. Mulako.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. So African Anthology is part of FIFA, is the storytelling side. What are these stories that we developed from the futures visioning exercises that we had and conversations with local communities and indigenous peoples? So for this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about the story that was developed by Ekari and Muti with the Mzimba people of Malawi. So I invite you to listen to our conversation and get to know a little bit about what we're doing.
Thank you, Ekari Muti, for joining us today. And so it's been 1 year since you wrote Mombera Rising. Considering the focus of FIFA on African futures, what still stands out to you about the process of writing these stories and just reflections on your experience? Let's start with Muti.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Muti Shema. I'm a speculative fiction writer from Malawi and one half of the team that created Mombera Rising, the writing team that created Mombera Rising. And I can't believe it's been more than a year since we actually wrote the story. It's still fresh in my mind. And there are a lot of reflections I still have and that still sit with me more than a year on. And I think the one that really stands out was a conversation that we had with the indigenous tribe, the Ngoni tribe, when we were doing the research for Mbombela Rising. And what I remember was we posed a question to the community. And the question that we asked them was, what does the future look like in 100 years? And there I was all excited that we're going to hear stuff like robots and AI and, all this, or, maybe flying through, rocket ships to Mars and things like that. And to my surprise, everything they said was incremental. So it's rather like, for example, the replacement of physical money would be mobile money, which is something we already have. So there were lots of things that were purely incremental, which was a bit frustrating. And I was, to be honest, a little frustrated because I expected a little more. And then during our conversations with the team from WITS, we decided to come up with a different question. And the question we then posed the next day, which was a little different, which we refined, was if you were given the agency to decide to run your society, how would you run it? And that's when we got a lot of content. They spoke about how they would do governance, how they would deal with all sorts of social inequalities. They had solutions to various things. And the thing that we noticed as they were speaking was that a lot of what they were saying, and they didn't say it in these terms, but what they were saying was more related to really going back to where they left off in terms of their own cultural evolution before Christianity, before colonialism, before enslavement. They wanted to start from there and sort of evolve according to their terms. And that was not what we expected. And it was very clear that the future that they saw was more cultural, not technological, which was my bias as I went into that particular space. And I think that's the thing that remains with me to this day, that for the indigenous tribe of the Ngonis, the future for them is more cultural, not technological, as we would assume because of our kind of Western conditioning.
Thank you for that, Muti. Carrie, anything stands out to you still?
Sure. Hi, it's Harry Mbundula Chirombo here. The second half of the Mbombela Rising authorial team. And I would concur with Muti as well. Like it was something that challenged our expectations, and delving into the cultural side. Like my stories were really focused in on that cultural side. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, was the perception of gender dynamics in the future, where within that culture, they had polygamy as something that they wanted to take, forward as into the future as part of their culture. And so that, regardless of my personal views about it, I wanted to make sure that I represented the vision that they had in mind. And so, my story wove that in a way that I hope was really representing what they had envisioned. And just to build on what Muti said as well, it was their future, Western future was more about like how much further we can go, how much higher, and all of that. Whereas for the Ngoni people, their future was about reclaiming their past, with culture, which shows the difference sort of between, the colonial perspective versus the Western world perspective. So it was very interesting overall, and it was an exciting and challenging project.
Just a little bit of insights from sort of varying different components of the FIFA project, everything from discussing futures and being able to just sort of wrap those into these data sort of decision-making tools. And we've really had this weaving together of a variety of different components. And so having finished, I think we were going to have our journey behind me, but that's absolutely fine. It allows me time to move on to Odi, who's going to talk about, having heard about this sort of FIFA 1, the journey that we've been on, what would we like to do if we got a FIFA 2? So, Odi, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So we learned quite a bit in the last 4 years of the project. And so we're already starting to think about what would we do next based on what we've learned so far. So Sally already presented that we've built quite an integrated network of different kinds of stakeholders on the continent. And we think, based on the trials of engaging with the African group of negotiators, trying to get some of this work into the policy space globally and also on the continent, that in doing the second round of this, we would want to build on that model, get more involved in the policy space, as well as organize around other things. So there's a lot of, in the international assessment processes like IPES, IPCC, often African scholarship is very underrepresented. Not only scholarship, but African voices in general are quite underrepresented. So organizing comment teams to really try and bring the context into those conversations. There's a few other things. So Sally's already presented a lot of data sets that we've really looked and found that there's quite a bit of data on the continent. Often we hear stories that there's not enough data, but our experience is that there's quite a bit of data that's unused. So in the next version of this, we would want to fast track and really try to apply this. So now that we know it is there, how do we use it? In terms of the futures thinking, it's really about, I think, what Belinda was presenting yesterday, that the version of the future that thinks about people with nature rather than trying to pit this two. I think it's often the case that when we think about the future of not only this continent but everywhere, that we think there's a future that has nature there and people there, sort of this land-sparing, land-sharing conversations. But I think if we start to think about alternative scenarios that position this nature with people, we think there's a lot that can be said there based on the experience from this project. And another thing that we did quite a bit in this project was also focusing on the nature finances. So often when you look at the why biodiversity indicators are not achieved, there's of course a lot of reasons for that. But one big reason is also that financing is always a problem. So what we did in this project, we focused on understanding the financial flows. In terms of, in particular, we focused on the public finance flows. And what we would like to do is to expand the data sets, because after the publication of this work, we got approached by a lot of people working on or holding a lot of interesting data that we couldn't access before, that we think would be able to expand the analysis to look at more countries on the continent, as well as do some work that focuses on private sector, which is something we weren't able to do in this case. So out of this, we think the two main clusters of interest for FIFA 2 would really be to think about decision tools. So Sally presented about AD, which is this landscape tool that was developed. So the AD Plus would really be making it more user-friendly and more basically getting it to the laptop, as Sally was saying. But this is also harnessing all this other information that we have now gathered here and try to integrate more of that in there. And so that will be also focusing on things like process modeling and amplify more African biodiversity in this. Another cluster that we are really interested in, and it's got a big scary name of rethinking economics, and I think for a lot of people, you look at that, you think, how on earth? And of course that's true. How do you rethink that? But we have three specific things that we want to look at in there. One is just exploring this idea of the care economy. That I don't know if Siobhan is here, but there's someone who can speak very well about this concept. I've already explained a bit about the nature financing component, which is that until the recent geopolitical issues, there was a lot of information and a lot of promise of big funds flowing into the continent, both for climate and biodiversity. Eventually, those conversations will come back. Maybe they're now in hiatus because of what's going on, but they will come back. And so if they do, how do we make sure that the funding that flows in does the right things, basically? And finally, we're going to be doing some integration and synthesis and really trying to integrate a lot of this information into these discussions and negotiations that we build with the stakeholders in that I've showed in the previous slide. But I'm under pressure for time, so I'll give this back to Laura.
Thanks so much, Odi. So I had promised the Slido link to go up at every point at that, but I don't think it came up. So here is your final chance, please. If you want to ask us questions, give us comments, please put up the QR code and start to give us some questions. Because we now have 10 minutes, and we do, for what we want to call the interrogation session. So this is a chance for everyone really to lay into us, to ask us, why were you doing this? What would you like to do? Why weren't you doing that? Why are you only focusing on this going forward? And of course, I think, whilst everyone is thinking through this, and we're going to have some of these sliding through in front of us, I believe that Jonathan, yes, wants to kick us off with some really hard questions, which is why I'm really grateful that I'm only facilitating and not answering any of them. But whilst the mic starts to make its way to the front over here, I would also just like to ask all of those who are involved in FIFA but who aren't up on stage, please to stand up. I think there's a cluster of you over on this side. Yes, stand, please stand, up, up, up. Everyone, Siobhan, just to say, this has been a collective effort for everyone. I know Siobhan is around somewhere. So thank you so much. This is also all about you and those who aren't physically present too. But right, and now, Jonathan has a microphone. So over to you, Jonathan.
Hopefully this actually perhaps is difficult, perhaps is less difficult. But firstly, I think sitting in the audience, listening to what you're doing in terms of the integrated approach that you are bringing to this, that needs to be celebrated. It's absolutely critical in any integrated solution. So congratulations. Now to the more difficult part, and I'm going to start by paraphrasing Einstein. And instead of saying same data, and I'm going to say doing the same thing and expecting different outcomes is tantamount to insanity. And we as human beings are incredibly good at doing the same thing over and over again. And that leads me to really thinking about how we do science. And we love longitudinal studies. They give us really, really important and effective data, but what they don't do is address urgency. And what we know with the climate challenge we have today is urgency is key. We can't afford to do things in these very long, longitudinal ways. We need to find shortcuts to do this more quickly. So there is challenge number one. What is your way to do the shortcuts more quickly? And so I thought about what is the answer that we're looking for. And the answer we're looking for, I believe, is this unique integration between conservation and ecology, our community, and sadly, capital. And we referenced the inability or the need to access money. And I just want us to think about that briefly. And the reality is we spend a huge amount of time in these forums talking about philanthropic support. Philanthropy represents less than 2% of global capital flows. So we want to fix the planet on less than 2% of global capital flows, and we're going to leave the other 98% doing bad. That sounds like a good plan. So the question is, how do you intend to make the 98% work for the good of the planet? And what kind of research and programs do you need to put forward so that that 98% can continue to make money? So that's the goal. How do we find that integrated approach? And two, how do you critically enable capital to support both conservation and ecology and the community? And so looking to the, now I begin to speculate, and these are the tough questions. The best filter process in business, now business isn't the be-all and end-all of anything, is the venture capital world. And it looks to filter programs on a logarithmic basis. And so one of the challenges for your science is how do you get to a logarithmic approach to science where you can exclude losers more quickly. And so therein lies another challenge to you as a panel. I said this wouldn't be easy, so I hope you're enjoying that. And so then finally, if you're able to do that, how do you move the dial? How does it manifest in more capital flowing to sustainable conservation and ecology preservation that does support the community? Can you point to living examples of that goal being manifest? And then ultimately, where can we begin to see that not only conceptualized, your roadmap, your what do we call it? Target, the picture that you had up, your plan, but actually manifested in delivery. And so the final thing is, how do we get all of this brilliant thought into real change on the ground? So I hope that Lara, sort of, as you say, maybe you don't need to answer it, everybody else on the panel does, but thank you, really appreciate the opportunity.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Jonathan. And I think that really has set off for a real interrogation. I also see quite a few really good questions coming up in the chat, so I'm going to take the liberty of actually pointing out for some of us some questions that I think we can answer. And I think I'm going to start off for the last person to answer, actually, Sal, moving the dial. I think that last point of Jonathan's, how are we actually taking what we're learning and actually seeing impact with communities on the ground? So I think something that you can think through from that perspective. Kim, for you, one of the questions that came up is, what if people don't actually have preferable visions? What if these nature's contributions to people component isn't actually part of what's possible? Sort of how are we navigating that from a data perspective? Odie, you're always going to get the finance. I think Jonathan is also sort of mobilized on this 98%, right? Not just the finance that's been flowing towards. How do we actually talk about this access to capital? If you could please talk to that. There's been a sort of a point on more indigenous local knowledge that we need and better integrated, and I might say better woven knowledge. I think I might ask Batlelifi and Mulako for both of you to sort of think through how we could actually operationalize that more in the next phase. Armani, there was a sort of a question here on Agnes not just being an evidence base, or what do we mean by that? Potentially you could expand a little bit more from that side. And then to Tender, there was a question how we've actually been leaving out some components, particularly around water, and I just want to say we weren't able to sort of present everything that had happened across FIFA. We actually have a really big marine and ocean component to the work we're doing. But sort of maybe you can talk about some of the access, coming from what you were saying, your story, that's not just focusing on trees, actually this expanded understanding. We were not just thinking about carbon, but we're also thinking about water, etc. dynamics, and sort of maybe what you would like to see going forward. And I am not going to answer anything. I'm going to hand over to Sal, and I think we'll just move this way along the panel, and I'll see if anything else comes up, and I've got a final wrap-up question for you all. Sal.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to start with the question about shifting the dial, because that's really the urgency. I'm going to start by saying I do think there is a lot of stuff happening on the ground. Like, one of the concerning things is that everyone is now really urgently seeing they need to do things. So there's a bunch of stuff happening all over Africa. Some of it good, some of it going to achieve some good things, some of it funded by venture capitalists. But so I really feel in the last few years the scientists have got with the program in terms of action now. But we still do need some advice and guidance, because a bunch of the stuff that's happening is really a bad idea and going to end up with undesirable, perverse outcomes. So we are engaged in some actions on the ground, and we're engaged in building the knowledge base and learning by doing. Because, like we say, we want to work with what's going on. We don't want to stop everything that's going on. We want to try guide it into directions where there's more consensus about the fact that it's going to be a good outcome, where there's fewer trade-offs as possible. But that's not enough. We really need to shift the dial, and for that, we need to challenge, and that's going to take some time. So that's why we're doing stuff on the ground with everyone now, but we are also taking these back routes to really rethinking how we fund conservation, but not only conservation, how we live with our ecosystems in a way that is sustainable.
And I think
so,
on that...
Sorry, just to say, we're working with some economic colleagues around these ideas of a care economy, like how to value the way that people care for nature and give it some kind of economic meaning. As Odie says, we've sort of engaged with how national governments fund conservation. Now we're moving on to thinking about the private sector, which is a whole different kettle of fish. And so I think it's about working at both scales. Action on the ground, learning by doing, and pushing back on the way the funding is coming in the first place.
Great. Thanks, Al, because we are out of time, but I am just going to let everyone sort of quickly answer the questions. I think this also talks to that logarithmic approach to science that you were mentioning, Jonathan, right? To put on a complex systems nerd hat, it's about this integrated sort of emergent outcome that you see from all of these different components. And I think this next phase is challenging these paradigms, rethinking economics. So I think that's a good segue, Odi, to talking about the finance really quickly, please.
Yeah, so thanks. I think this is a very important question because indeed, if you look at the framing of capital as, nature positive capital versus nature negative capital, you see that quite a lot of it is sitting in the private sector, and so for me, I think the mobilizing comes in two ways. So if we think about capital as wheeling capital, which is people who are saying, "Tell me what to do." At the moment, unfortunately, they're being told by climate cowboys, people who are trying to implement quick solutions, single-issue solutions. And I think the wheeling capital is one that is currently a low-hanging fruit. And then on the other side, you have the sort of the capital that's waiting to be convinced. And I think that kind of capital, the language that he speaks is the language of green bonds, the language of offset mechanisms, and that's going to first use the usual economic instruments first before we get to get it to the point where it's wheeling. But this is I think there's a lot of hope, I think, and promise. And when you think about the coalitions of private sector, there's a few organizations and coalitions that are forming now that we can certainly tap into. But I know that you want me to stop.
No, thanks, Odi. That's perfect. Bathalifi, African voices, actually, indigenous local knowledge. How do you see this program being able to lift those up?
I think a lot of it actually begins with the kind of research tools and methods that we use. It's important for us to not just parachute ourselves as researchers into the respective landscapes within which we work. It's important for us to build within those networks and rapport that exists within the ground. And it's through these, the process of building these relationships that the ground as it exists, the stories that exist at grassroots then come up and affect systems transformations. It's not an easy process, but it's very important for us to really build those genuine connections and effect change.
Thank you. Malako, how do we get more indigenous local knowledge in?
First of all, we already have quite a bit of evidence from very different places that have never been spoken to before. We have the opportunity to look at the pathways that they propose. That may be very different from what we know as conventional knowledge on how conservation, but climate action should happen. And I think that's an opportunity we can leverage into the next step on the how.
Tatenda, moving into sort of different spaces, not just carbon, thinking about other aspects. What do you see for the next round of FIFA?
Yeah, so this week have explored many different aspects, like what Kim alluded earlier on, that our products, they are not only directed to carbon, but they are also looking at non-carbon benefits. That means we are looking at the use of the landscape holistically, looking at different interests from all that perspective, and trying to strike a balance. Actually, that's the perspective of the decision tools that we are looking at. That when a landowner looks at it, he should be able to make decisions based on their interests, but also striking a balance on the systems that occur within their landscape and be able to make a decision on what is of best interest going forward.
Yeah. Perfect, thank you. Armani, working with Agnes.
Yeah, so the first phase of Agnes, what we were trying to do was actually to identify the trade-offs in relation to climate mitigation, biodiversity, and livelihood. And that is very important because you see how livelihoods are quite significant in Africa. So we had to do that. But actually, once you build the data, what you realize is people interact more with narratives and stories. And a lot of these climate actions are implemented in Africa by NGOs, mostly working with the communities. So we have to, and I think FIFA has done a bit of that, and that's why we partnered with Agnes in the first place, because they negotiate more of these. But we have to tell the stories and the narrative from the data to a much wider audience to really get our stories and message across.
And just to clarify for those, Agnes refers to the Africa Group of Negotiators, Expert Support. So those who are actually sort of supporting our negotiators when they go to these intergovernmental meetings. Kim, what if people's visions aren't preferable? Destroying things.
I didn't quite understand the question.
What if sort of the biophysical possibilities aren't actually preferable, but people still want to do something? How do we navigate our own inherent biases?
So I think part of the way the question was framed was what if natural climate solutions aren't needed in a system? And ultimately, our continent is not a global emitter. We really need to focus on adaptation, and part of adaptation is addressing the fact that communities need to benefit from whatever intervention we implement. And so potentially there are interventions that aren't preferable for people, but we need to identify the benefits that directly contribute to people's livelihoods and well-being and make sure that those are the ones that are accounted for in the trade-offs that Armani alluded to.
Cool. Thanks, Kim. A lot of really good questions touching on sort of Eurocentrism, colonialism, how we can actually capitalize sort of the voices that we've heard. I am going to answer the final question, and there was a really good one on what gives us hope for the future, and I'm going to answer on behalf of the entire team, and it's projects like FIFA. It's recognizing that Africa does have the data that we can put into these intergovernmental processes. We are leading one of the most important synthetic interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary projects that I've seen globally, right? And we're operating it from the local level all the way into the regional sort of continental perspective. We're being taken seriously in the global sphere. I think we're publishing in Nature, for example, sort of they're taking our commentaries on board. And for me, that's what gives us hope. As researchers, that we can actually provide the evidence base, the pushback that we need for the new narratives that are going to take us onto a more preferable, more prosperous future for people and the planet, starting from our African continent. So on that note, thank you so much, and I think I'm going to hand over to the next proceedings that will emerge from this. Thank you so much, everyone.
Danny, must I make my housekeeping announcement? I was supposed to make a housekeeping announcement about the posters. Were you going to do that? Apparently, everyone who produced the beautiful posters that I have had the privilege of judging over the last few days, there is an A0 version for you to take home. Anytime you want it, you must go to the reception, is that right? And you can take your beautiful poster and use it and put it up and spread it to spread the word. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. So if everyone could just move down at your leisure just in the next half an hour to the bottom with the dining area for the JWO award. Thank you so much.